Yo, what's up, everybody? I got my man Petey Pablo on here. If you don't know him, he's the world's greatest cricket player in on the planet. I found this out this past summer, so as always, I'll let him dive in. But our first question is, dude, give me the wildest story. As you can tell me back from when you were an athlete, or you can give a wild story from back with coaching, and then we'll just kind of dive in from there.
Yeah, so I have a couple. So I'll give you one from when I was an athlete. This was in college. It's not necessarily super wild, but so I was in college. I played D3 ball in Minnesota, and I was a running back, and I was returning a kickoff, and um, I was super excited about it because me and my one of my good friends, his name is Joey Propati, he wanted to really like take someone out on a block, right? And
Yeah.
so I catch the ball, I set him up, and he just like literally annihilates this guy. Okay. And then out of nowhere, I just get smacked so hard. Okay. So I get up and I'm like, all right, I'm fine. And then I like, I can't breathe, and I can't breathe because I got a hip pointer. If you ever experience a hip pointer, oh my goodness. Like you
Yeah.
you feel like you can't lift your leg, you feel like you can't breathe, you can't step. And this is like on the second series. So I think the other team had just scored and I just was returning it. And so now I have to play the rest of the game with this hip pointer, and I could barely move my leg. I look like one of those dogs who just injured his foot, and I'm playing this game just limping with this. And every time I try to like breathe, even just like this, just it like hurts so bad. And so that was my getting annihilated after I set up my friend to annihilate someone else story.
Yeah.
And then one with coaching. um in my first experience coaching college gymnastics, I didn't really understand this at the time, but I learned a lot about um, the anatomy of gymnasts in regards to how their body responds to the forces that are on them, right?
Right.
And so on vault, I was spotting one of the athletes. They did a vault, and they did a full twist onto the table, back tuck off, right? Now, and that was my main job was spotting when I was at that university. I was young. This was probably 2017.
Yeah.
um and so we're in the arena kind of getting ready for season. And she hits the springboard, and then when she hits the springboard, this rainbow goes, and I'm like, what the heck just happened? I almost got rained on. And
Oh man.
yeah, so if you're catching what I'm throwing down, I'm like,
Yeah, totally.
and I didn't know this because like a lot of times, gymnasts will
We're
always
all
need to
dead.
go to the restroom, right? And coaching, like now, one of the things that used to frustrate me is when a athlete will come onto the floor, take one turn, and they'll be like, "Can I use the restroom?" Especially after we've like gone from a break. I'm like, why didn't you just use the restroom before you started floor?
Right.
But even if they go to the restroom and they come and do floor, just the way females' bodies and how their
Yeah.
bladder drops with all that force, it just happens. And so it gave
Dude.
me an understanding to that. But I'm like, man, I've had other stuff, and I'm sure other people and other sports have experienced.
Some wild ones. Yeah. Dude, how was Minnesota? Where are you originally from?
So I was born in Haiti, and then I came to the U.S. when I was about 22 months old,
Oh wow.
and
Okay.
then
I don't think I knew
um,
that.
yeah.
And then
So I
where'd you wh where's the first place you lived in the US?
was in Minnesota,
Oh, okay. So
in
did you
St.
grow up in
Paul.
Minnesota?
I did. So I was there from 1994 until 2016.
Oh shit. Because I was curious when you were talking about like playing football in Minnesota. I was like, holy hell, it's gotta be cold.
Yeah, no, it's you have to be a different type of crazy to kind of
Yeah,
play.
yeah, yeah. Because I remember like back in my glory Pee Wee football days of like even like when it would be cold and wet, like they would literally have us basically in warm-ups. They're like, you might as well just go ahead and get wet now.
No.
And I'm sure you just had to get accustomed to it there.
Yeah, it you know, it once you start playing, it gets better. But if you're not playing, or if you're just on the sidelines for a while, say you're an offensive player and um, the defense can't get off the field,
Yeah.
then you get pretty cold,
Yeah.
just kind of standing there. But
What's the coldest you've ever played in?
I don't know about the coldest, but I remember we were playing at St. John's and the field was literally like a blizzard. Like you couldn't see anything. And this was when I was
Bro.
playing college football. Like you couldn't see anything. They had to like shovel um the field during the game. It was just pouring. And those guys at St. John's, they're like these huge farm boys who like love this stuff, right? And so they were just and they're like big, just annihilating our team, you know, all in the
No
snow
gloves,
with
no
this
long
thing.
sleeves, just
Oh man, especially when you're playing my position and when you're playing a running back, right? You have a tendency of possibly fumbling the ball,
yeah.
in snow or rain, so they tell you not to. But man, some of those times you just have to be a little selfish, right? And think,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No
and
wonder you wanted to
and
get involved in an indoor sport.
see, even for me, I didn't even like me getting into gymnastics wasn't anything I ever thought about or dreamed about. Like it wasn't a thought until it became an opportunity. When I was a senior in high school, that's kind of when the opportunity came up. Before then, I'd never thought of gymnastics as like a career or even a sport that I would do. Even though
Right.
as a kid I could do flips and stuff, like I taught myself how to do flips. I remember I had a friend named Derek Ujawa who has been on like a what's the show on some like those dancing shows, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So
yeah,
you think you can
yeah.
dance,
Mm-hmm.
like he's gotten to that point, and he was like a trained dancer, right? And so he learned how to do flips and acrobatics and stuff like that. So I remember each summer he and I would always be competing to see who can get the next like part of the flip. It'd be like one time we would get a back handspring and then see who can get a front flip by the next summer, who can get a round up back handspring back tuck, who can twist. And so we just always had this thing, and we did it with breakdancing too. And so that was the only real experience that I really had with gymnastics. Um, and you know, my football coach, one of my football coaches in high school, was one of the was the head gymnastics coach at the high school that I went to. And so there's times where I'm like, I would go in there just to kind of show off. I'm like, hey, I could do a full. And I'm like,
Totally.
at that time, I was a little immature. My pants are like falling off my hips, and I go in and I go just throw a twist, right? And so um, just kind of, just having fun. And then senior year, it became a thing where one of the coaches who was at the gym, because in Minnesota, or at least in high school sports, it's different than club. At least with high school gymnastics, you can't work with your athletes during the off season,
Yeah.
unless there's 2 months in the summer, which you have to get a waiver to really do that. You can work with your athletes. So you have to find a local coach, either club coach, gymnastics coach, or send your kids to other places. And luckily ours had a gymnastics facility that ran year round, and we had another coach who came in and worked with the athletes, and so he kind of recruited me. But the way he actually really recruited me is he would talk about powerlifting. And when I was in high school, to me at least, I felt like I was pound for pound one of the strongest kids on my
Yeah.
like football team, um and so he would always talk to me about that kind of stuff. And then he was like, hey, there's a need for more male spotters in the sport, and the rest is kind of history.
So not going off on a side note, but I know like the whole, I don't know, for lack of better terms, kind of like strength and conditioning, that's kind of a joy, a fulfillment side like for you as well. Is that kind of when that began? Just lifting through high school and then just the whole powerlifting kind of conversations. Is that like how did that become a thing?
Yeah, so I probably started really lifting in middle school. So seventh grade, I kind of was messing around with friends, and we would kind of do like burnouts. We do a lot of burnout sets. So we would like go on the tricep machine and like burn out. We would, say we started with um 55 pounds. We would go 55 pounds and burn out, and then we'd
Yeah.
go, 50 and burn out. And so that's kind of how I started to lift. Um, and then I got into organized sports. And once I started kind of getting into organized sports, and weightlifting class and stuff like that, that's when I kind of fell in love with it.
Hmm.
But I didn't do any real powerlifting or even Olympic lifting or anything like that until I was coaching at the first college that I coached at.
Oh, you
So
personally.
yeah, so I started like getting into Olympic lifting then. Before I was just strong, just doing, just your typical.
Herschel Walker workouts.
Yeah, because I did like when I was in high school, we had a program called BFS, and our head coach of the football team was also one of the spokespeople for like bigger, faster, stronger. And so we kind of did that program. So it was based off of you did your bench, your squat, your deadlift, and we did a lot of hex bar deadlifts. We didn't really do
Hmm.
straight bar that much.
Hmm.
And then we did power cleans, and then we would do like overhead squats. So that was like the main components of it, and then your auxiliary lifts and stuff like that. And then we had other coaches who would come in with more experience on some of the other accessory stuff, and so started kind of getting into that then. And then I always kind of had a passion for lifting just because I was good and I was strong.
Yeah.
Um, but it wasn't until I really got into coaching gymnastics that I started to realize some of the areas that gymnastics could benefit. And then I started coaching high school not high school gymnastics. Well, I did start coaching high school gymnastics, but I was also coaching high school football, and then track and field, and that's when it really like started to blossom.
Yeah. 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 So when you were coaching college, were you the one running their workouts?
No, by the
Y'all had
time
a
I
strength
got there,
coach.
yeah. So by the time I had gotten there, the coaching staff had already, because I got there late. I got there in like September. So by that time, the athletes are there. So the coaches had already programmed their like in gym conditioning and stuff like that.
Right.
And
Right.
then it was at a Division 1 program, and they were fortunate to have a strength coach that was designated for gymnastics. And so I didn't really go to many of those workouts, but I connected with the strength coach, and he was the one who kind of got me into like Olympic lifting.
Yeah.
And so yeah, my role really at that first place was just really a spotter um and just kind of learning.
Yeah. 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 So are you, because obviously like following a lot of your stuff, and incorporating, again, for lack of better terms, some of that like strength and conditioning stuff. I know a lot of your stuff is right now is kind of centered around like speed, plyometrics, agility, things like that. Are you doing any strength stuff, or is it primarily just kind of speed stuff?
So I do um like at the gym that I'm at, I've brought a lot of the, I guess, non-gymnastics movements in regards to typical training to our club, and I've done a lot of those strength stuff there. Not necessarily with weights, just because we don't have it.
Right.
And
So
um,
what's your take on that? I'm curious.
oh, using
Especially
weights,
specifically with gymnasts.
I think it's
We could
beneficial.
go down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think it's really beneficial, to be honest, because one, you got to think. the whole time that a gymnast has been developing, especially if they've been developed well, has been kind of really technical, right?
Mhm.
So understanding the lifts and being able to incorporate them, I think is important, because not only is it for the strength of their bodies, right, to get better, but it's really for being able to maintain the impacts um, that they put on their bodies over and over again, right? So if you can use lifts that put you in positions to be able to, in a control manner, um, go through some of the similar forces that you will. So, like, say we're doing squats or we're doing power cleans and stuff like that. Like, squats get your legs loaded and ready to be able to, take on impacts and stuff like that. Because on floor or on vault, like, running hurts. Like, if you were to run like that hard all the time, it takes a lot out of your body. And
Right.
if you never really feel your body or train your body how to take that on, then it doesn't really happen. It's almost like, this is probably a bad example, but just to kind of think about it, the people who kind of do those food contests, right? So if they just showed up to like the hot dog eating contest and they just started eating as many hot dogs and never trained their body to and train their stomach to be able to take that on, it just wouldn't make sense, right? So if
Right.
I go and I'm just competing, and I don't do anything to like get my body prepped, all I'm going to do is set myself up for injuries, right? And so lifting is the training that those food competition eaters are doing, where they're building capacity, and that's how I call it, is really building your capacity for the forces that you're going to take on throughout a season, and then making up for some of the lack of body to strength ratios,
Hmm.
and being able to develop some type of strength that can allow that range to get a little bit closer. You know what I mean? Because sometimes it's just hard, right? And putting some load on it controlled, I think is really important. And you have to be wise, and you have to also think about not only like movements that are specific to the sport, but also movements that are that address when things don't go right. Because a lot of times, gymnasts will get hurt because of putting themselves in a position that's not typical, like not linear, right?
Right.
If I make a non-linear step or mistake, that's a lot of times when my injuries happen. So if I can train non-linear strength and non-linear speed and agility, and plyometrics, then it gives my body a better chance of, hey, I landed short on a tumbling pass, or I in my twisting, I came out and I stepped diagonal or whatever it is, and I'll be able to go.
Yeah, I find it fascinating because all the years, I guess over a decade, like in specifically in the strength and conditioning world and having, my own performance facility, is there's high performance to me is when we're talking about like physical performance, is it's the balance of strength and flexibility. And so the analogy, like I always say, it's like, gymnasts spend so much time, especially as they're being young and developed, on the flexibility part, because that is an important aspect of it. But as you're saying too, is like, if I don't have muscle, especially as we get older, right, and go through physical body changes, if I don't have the muscle to withstand a lot of that, that's where, to me, is, yes, a lot of injuries happen specifically on different planes. And you can look at it from a flip side, right? Most football injuries happen because of a lack of flexibility, right? It's just the opposite for a lot of other athletes. And so it's like, football players, they can freaking bench press the house, but they can't turn around and wipe their ass because they're not flexible enough, right? They can squat the house, but can't touch their toes. You'd be amazed at how many specifically football guys in over a decade of working with, like, they literally can't sit back on their ankles, right? Like, it's insane. They look at me and they're like, bro, how do you do? I'm like, I just thought it was a thing, right? I thought that everybody could do this, right? And they're like, dude, like,
Yeah.
I literally can't sit back like that. And so it's finding that balance. And so, I do find it interesting that, obviously there is that it's a little bit like, I guess, old school mentality of the fear of putting all this muscle on. And it's like, yeah, but like most most gymnasts, most athletes, like they don't even have the genes to look like Arnold, right? Like even if you wanted to, you'd probably have to go buy some of the things that he bought, right? To be able to look like that. And so, yeah, I'm always curious what people's takes are, because in having that and in working with a decent amount of gymnasts inside the gym from the physical aspect of the benefits of I call it loading them up in terms of like putting real weight on the bar, not just the barbell, not just the 10-pound dumbbell, but like, I had at the time one of the athletes, I mean, she probably weighed like 80, 85 pounds and could squat 205, right? Like, I mean, was just very, very, very strong. And so I think, and I'd love to get your take on this. I think now, like, more what I was really doing at that time, because the fascinating side is it gave them a greater sense of belief and confidence and value in themselves. It made their, like, literally, it made their bodies feel a different way. So they saw themselves a different way. You can call it confidence, you can
Right.
call it whatever it is. And so it's
Right.
like, really, that's what I was after. It was like, they would come in and be like, are we gonna try to lift more today? I'm like, no, not today. They're like, but like, why not? And I'm like, because they felt so good about themselves.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think those things are super important. And also you can create, especially power, like power is the thing besides, the flexibility thing in gymnastics is how much power can you produce and project it in the correct direction that you're trying to, right? And then be able to take all that power and absorb it when everything is done, right? On landings or whatever it is and handstands. Um, and so I think it is important. And some of the things you can do too is create, because really power is, moving, weight or mass as fast as you can, right? It's the speed element of of lifting, right? And so, or really exerting mass, force. And so, um, kind of you don't always have to lift heavier for it to
Totally.
feel like, if you can lift it faster. So say that athlete you talked about is, squatting 205. And at first, it's just like down and up and it's whatever. It's a little bit just I guess normal. Okay, how fast can you move it, right? You can put it on time. You can also do tempo stuff if you really want to create different loads, right? And have pauses or kind of slow eccentrics with explosive concentric movement, stuff like that to kind of switch it up. And understanding the systems that you're working and how you can take advantage of that, because gymnasts are incredible, men. The stuff that they can do in the sport, but then when they go and venture out in other sports, the stuff that they figure out that they can do because of the structure that the sport gives and the technical prowess that they have, right? In everything that we're doing, there's technique is key, right? And yes, there comes a point where talent can kind of get you so far, but if you're going to have tight legs, that are straight and pointed feet and stuff like that with straight arms, a lot of that stuff is more technique based, right? Not necessarily like talent based.
Mm.
Sometimes some kids are more flexible than others, you know, um, which which is good, and you can say that's partially talent, but a lot of it is technique. And so they can take on these lifts, they can take on and understand them, and if there's a coach who understands what they're doing, then do it, right? If you
Yeah.
understand what you're doing, then do it, and not fear it, because you know what it can do and what benefits it can have.
Yeah. 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 I mean, yeah. I mean, and explain the ability to explain to them why. I mean, ultimately, that's, I think that's the most important piece. Um, because you can have the most quote unquote scientific written program, but if they don't understand it and they don't really believe in it, it's ultimately meaningless. And that's with anything in any sport or just anything in life, right? Versus, I can make something up. I can make a workout up on the fly and they're like, why are we doing this? And I fully convince them of like the value and the benefit behind it. Then you're gonna get 10x the results than sitting down and developing some scientific program where they think it's bullshit. I mean, it's the
Yeah,
name of the game.
no, for sure. One area though that I've come to realize is in gymnastics specifically, mobility in gymnasts are not usually that good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mobility struggles a lot of times, where in other sports like football, basketball, volleyball, those other sports, they require more of those movements that are, that require more mobility. And so you see those athletes have better mobility, even though their flexibility isn't good, their mobility is way better than gymnasts. And I
Yeah.
think that's another reason why some get hurt. So I like to do a lot of work with gymnasts on their mobility, because I'm like, if we can get you to move, through those ranges better, again, it keeps your hips healthy, keeps your back healthy, it keeps your knees healthy, and just gives you an opportunity to do the sport longer. And yeah, so that's one thing I think gymnastics needs a little bit more, besides speed training that I've been doing, is mobility work.
Yeah. Yeah. So why? So when you got into coaching, was it right into college or did you go club stuff first?
No, so in 2018 was my first club experience. So that's when I started coaching club. Before then, I coached high school gymnastics. So I started coaching in 09, 2009. And so I started with high school gymnastics. Um, I was, so the high school that I went to, I ended up helping run their high school team workouts, and became one of those coaches because I wasn't on staff there. So I could coach there and not be under that same rule where you can't coach your own athletes type of thing. And then I got an opportunity when I was in college to be a high school assistant. I was an assistant for 2 years. And then my rival high school, I became the head coach for 3 seasons. And then in 2016 was when I became when I got my first opportunity to coach college gymnastics.
In 16 and then went club in 18.
Yeah, so I had two years of college at two different places. One at the university, Utah State University, and the second one was University of Wisconsin Whitewater.
Would you go back?
Yeah, I would. And part of my thing right now is I'm in school kind of working on my degree, so I never finished my undergrad degree. So that's one of the things that's kind of for me, you know um, kind of holding me back. One, some places will still allow you to, but
Continue to work on your degree. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, so it depends on where you're at. So
Yeah.
I've had, different inquiries and stuff like that, and processes I've gone through. But also just kind of, having a family now and stuff like that, just making sure that it makes sense for our family
Changes the
to be able to
game,
make that
bro.
living.
Changes the
Yeah,
game.
yeah. So that's kind of where it's at. But I'd love to one day. But it also depends now that I've launched my podcast plus my training business that I've started doing where I train athletes. If that really takes off, then we'll have to see.
So tell me too, like that's what I was kind of curious. I wanted to dive into like for lack of better terms, kind of like what's the purpose of your podcast? Like why did you kind of get it kicked off and going? And like what's the vision? Like what's the dream like for that?
Yeah. So the reason why I kind of started that podcast, I was kind of thinking one day, I was like, you know what? I wanted to start training athletes. And the well, it was partially that. So I started thinking about really that when I was in 2017. I started really thinking about, hey, I want to start my own thing, and start training athletes. But then
Like sports performance thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then I started to think about, I was like, you know what? One thing I noticed about gymnastics, is, running technique is not always there for not for everyone. There's a lot of people who can actually run well, and coaches who can coach their athletes to run well, and or just athletes who can just get it. But
Yeah.
on vault specifically, so much of it is about the speed, right? And so the speed that you can build up to get to the table and utilize all that to be able to have a dynamic vault. And to me, if you don't have enough speed coming in, it's hard for you to translate everything into a dynamic vault, right? And um, as the requirements on vault are getting greater and athletes are doing bigger things, colleges are going to start looking for that more, right? And so I wanted to start a podcast to kind of address that. And that was my real vision, was to kind of talk about, how to teach other coaches how to improve their speed. But then I started thinking about other things, like, okay, what other ideas? And in club gymnastics, especially the recruiting processes can be,
Mm.
a big part of it, if you have athletes that are one of recruitable talent and recruitable age, and that whole process. And sometimes people don't know about different universities, like what's out there, not only in gymnastics, but for gymnasts specifically, what can I do outside of gymnastics if I am not at the point where I'm able to earn, a spot on a gymnastics team? Can I go do acro and tumbling? Can I do cheer? What other opportunities based off of what I've trained my whole life and invested my whole life into that I can do? And so I thought of the idea to start, interviewing coaches and talking about their program, about who they are, and really emphasizing part of it, um, who they are, especially now with the transfer portal,
Yeah.
and making and having that be such a big thing. And part of it, to me, at least from my perspective, is when you don't properly go through the process of really understanding where you're going to go and what it all entails, and then you get there and you find that, hey, this is not the place I need to be for the next 4 years, or even for this semester, and then you end up leaving, or you quit, or whatever it is. If you had a little bit more information on the front end, that you could access, one, knowing, the personnel, because no matter where you're at, if I grew up a Alabama fan, right? And throughout my time from when I was a kid, say I was, 8 years old until I was 18, there could be different coaches who are there. And because of that, may be the reason why I do or do not want to go to Alabama, right? I could I could be like, oh my goodness, the head coach is so awesome at 8 years old. And then I get into the process and I'm like, you know what? The head coach that is there is, it's not the style of coaching that will be conducive for me.
That, like in any sport, like it amazes me. And I get it because athletics is a business at the end of the day, right? Like, and I think that so many athletes, they get frustrated, deterred because they're recruited with a coach's personality one way, and they get there and they're like, what the fuck happened? Like, I was taking pictures and they were treating me like a king, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, I'm like, dude, like, you have to, like, doing your due diligence is so important. And I think that that's becoming lost with a lot of these athletes. Is I think that they just see glitz, glamour, the way that they're treated on these recruiting trips and things like that, and not knowing what the true personalities of a program is, what their vision is, with the personalities of specifically like a head coach, because it trickles down, right? Like it starts from the top all the way down into the athletes. And so their inability, honestly, to ask the real difficult questions, to help them understand like if this is a good fit or not. And then I think also on the flip side of that is getting them to be honest about what kind of experience that they actually want. I'll use the football example, right? Would you rather go be a walk-on at an Auburn or Alabama, maybe never see the field, but you get the jersey? Or would you rather go play 4 years at Southern Miss, right? Like still both Division I programs, one's SEC, or a couple of them are SEC, and you're going to the glitz and the glamour. Or like, is your experience of like I want to go be a difference maker. Like I want to play. Like my experience is like I actually want to get on the field and like do what it is that I actually enjoy doing. And so I think that like all that is just getting really, really, really lost. And I think that's a a big reason. It's like now with the portal, it's like you've got your way out. It's like I can go test the waters. I don't really have to do the due diligence because I kind of have a crutch, basically.
Yeah. And and it's hard because when things like that happen, it becomes trauma in people's lives, especially the athletes or the parents and even the coaches. There's a lot of times where I hear coaches don't have relationships with the next level coach at a certain university because of the process or even how their athlete was treated when they were there, right? And if coaches, parents, and athletes knew more on the front end about them, and could see how they operate and stuff like that, or even hear testimonies from former athletes and stuff like that, which is also part of the podcast, it would help them give a better perspective, and so they can choose places that are better for them and their needs as an athlete. Not every program, I could be a Alabama caliber athlete, but again, that staff just may not be conducive for me just because it isn't, because either they're too intense or not intense enough, or they're too nice, or they're not hard enough, or they're really competitive, or they're not competitive, or they favor this or they favor whatever the case may be. And again, these are things that people just experience and have different stories, and not everybody has the same story, right? Sometimes you'll go to certain places and their experiences are different, right? And being able to hear their experiences and be like, okay, you know what, they had a great time, but the way they had a great time wouldn't work for me.
Yeah, I think too, I think I won't say all, but I think a lot, the majority are scared to write their own experience. They're scared to do what it is that they actually want to do. There's just so much pull from, I think, number one, society. And then I think number two is 1A or 2A and 2B, we're probably like teammates, peers, and then family. I think that it's I don't know. People like, here's the best way to put it. People would rather go to a well-known, big-name Division I school for the sake that they get to post the picture that is going to be gone in 24 hours or be at the bottom of your feed later, for that 24 hours of dopamine and excitement, rather than the 4 years of like a real genuine experience of like what they actually want. And then they wonder why they're fucking miserable. Not everybody, but a lot of them, of like, what's like, dude, you didn't make a decision for yourself. Like that's the problem. Don't like, at some point, like we have to be honest with ourselves. And it's like, yeah, like I did. I got sucked in the wrong direction. I did get caught up in the externals. I did get caught up like in those things because I know an athlete was like that. Boiled down to two schools, and it was like essentially it was like they're like, everyone expects me to do A, so I'm going to do B. I'm like, seriously? Like, just for the sake of like rolling the dice and like showing everybody that, oh, I had you fooled. Like, no, like you
Right.
actually know you want to do A. Yeah, but everybody expects me to do that. Who cares?
No,
For,
definitely.
fortunately, they made the right decision, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, that's no. And that's where, wanting to be able to help, be a resource for those for people to be able to make the right decisions for them. And again, during this process, people are going to make decisions that may be wrong or maybe exactly what they needed, right? And so as much information and as much resources that they possibly can have in order to make that the wisest decision that they can. That's what I'm trying to do with this podcast. And I also kind of want to take it like on the road. And what I mean by that is like I want to do these in person where
Dude, that would be so dope. I'm not gonna lie.
because if you think of other sports, right, they do the inside scoop of programs. In
Mm-hmm.
gymnastics, you don't really see that. Like, yes, you know, each team has their production team and stuff like that that kind of works with them, but you don't really get the inside scoop, right? And so being able to come in and as you come into the campus, you can see the campus, envision it like, we're coming in and showing what the campus looks like, the drive-in, what it looks like surrounding it. Hey, we're going to Iowa and there's a bunch of cornfields everywhere. If you didn't know there's cornfields everywhere, now you do. And then all of a sudden this beautiful campus shows up and this and that. And then once you're in, you kind of see what a training practice looks like, this, and then we sit down and have these conversations with coaches and athletes and go into the cafeterias. And now, before you ever get there, which, a lot of coaches talk about, the biggest thing is getting on campus so you can actually get the feel for it. Now, if you can get into your mind like a vision for it, then you're like, hey, I want to go there. Because the hardest thing really in that process of getting there is having the resources to do that, right? If I'm in a state that doesn't like being in Texas, I can't go and drive in Texas to all these universities for gymnastics because there's only one gymnastics program, right? And
Right.
depending on where you're at, if I'm all the way in San Antonio or El Paso, you know, um, having to go all the way up there or fly up there or whatever it is, you know, um, that's hard, on families to think, okay, you know what, I want to visit unofficially, I want to visit all these schools, right? And it gets expensive to go and do that. Now you have information that shows, okay, that's worthwhile. I want to be in that place and experience it for myself. I want to go there and be like, okay, you know what, based off of what I've learned and I've seen, hey, this is a place that I could be. I love the campus, I love the classroom sizes, I love the views, I love that there's cornfields over here, or I love that we're next to the city. Hey, I love the facility, I like that they have a pit and they have soft landings, or they have 3 vault tables, or they have this many setup bars, or these whatever. Now you can see all those things, and really get locked in. And I don't want to get like too personal with the programs because I think there is um a sense of um obviously like privacy, right? Because you want to keep certain things, especially when talking about the locker room. And when I say locker room, like you get to see what the locker room looks like,
Right.
because a lot of times those glitz and glamour and all these things matter to people, right? And if you can see it, be like, oh my goodness, man, I love this. I could relax over here. I could do this. Now I can see myself being there for so many times, so much, for 4 years or whatever.
And like I think that, take it for what it's worth, but I think that like if you could give real raw reviews, like the negative sides of it too, right? Like not shitting on or bashing a program, but like, hey, like after all the video, like here's my take, like here's all the good, and then like here's kind of like some of the negatives of it, and so that way, like because like life is both positive and negative, right? And so it's like not trying to like 100% like hype up something. It's like, so like they can get like, dude, you're onto something. Totally. I'm into it. Like that's genius.
And that's where like even just the title kind of came from. Like the actual title stands for helping equip athletes to transform, and that's like the point of what encompasses a lot of what I'm trying to do, right? So you're trying to transform into someone else or into this athlete, or you're transforming into a new phase of life, or, and being able to have the resources to be able to do that, and the life lessons that you learn and all these other things, and the heated conversations part is kind of really like clickbait, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because one, it's yes, we're talking about things that can help athletes transform, both positive or negative, but also sometimes these conversations you know, aren't easy, right? And right now, so far I haven't had any that have been really like heated,
Yeah.
but who knows, right? And again, I heard this recently is, civil war happens when people stop talking. So if you're able to start having just conversations about things, right, and talk about the differences and the, this and that, then again, it just helps things out instead of people just, lashing out and all these other things, and just, they're having healthy conversations. Again, you and I could have talked about the weight stuff and I could have disagreed, or you could have
Yeah. Yeah.
disagreed.
Yeah.
You could have been like, yeah, that doesn't make sense because this and that. And I could have been like, yeah, I don't agree with you because this and that. And again, it comes from our own experiences, right?
Right.
And that's going to help people, right? It's going to help people understand, like, oh, okay, I see where you're coming from, or hey, I see where he's coming from, or I'm coming from, so on and so forth.
Well, and I think too is while that's like super important, and I don't know, I think this is where like with me going into different programs is my approach is very, very, very much like different than I think the vast majority of like the industry. Because going off what you're saying is like to me, to be able to grow towards something, like there has to be contrast, right? Like there has to be like if I'm going to change who I am, I got to know the old me so I can get to the new me, right? Like I can't just like jump in and like dive into like certain places.
No,
So,
definitely. No, definitely. And those are things that's super important, and I'm excited. I'm excited about where this thing can go.
yeah, yeah,
I've
yeah.
done almost like over 15, I think, so far, and
Nice.
it's on
They
my
say once
YouTube
you get to
page.
20, you're in the 1%.
I'm excited because right now I have four other ones archived that I haven't even published yet.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I'm waiting to do that. And I'm excited to just learn about other people, connect with other people, and get other, athletes and parents and coaches connected with other coaches. Because sometimes, a kid from California may not ever hear about a gym out east just because they just don't know. Like I did one with Peng Peng Lee. She didn't know anything about UCLA. She didn't even know UCLA existed. And
Mm-hmm.
her being in Canada, and luckily, she was at that point with her athletics where, in her career, where she was exposed. But sometimes some people are not exposed just because they just may be in a different location and they're not on the biggest stages, like on the world stages or even Olympic stages, to be able to be seen, um, and could miss out on an opportunity where, hey, I'm from, California, but there's a school out in New York that I would love to go to, and
Right.
I may never know about it.
Yeah, just is. All right, dude. Last question. If you were in a stadium with 100,000 people and you had to only deliver one message to them, what would your message to them be?
Have love for people and get to know people, and truly have um, genuine conversations to get to know people. And I think that's the beauty of life is there's differences and so many people, right?
Yeah.
And getting to know that gives you a greater understanding of the world that you live in and have a greater appreciation for the world that you live in.
Awesome, dude. I love it, man. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love what you're doing. I love your vision. So yeah, dude, we'll have to maybe like jump on and like dive deeper into just literally jamming out about where that's going, how it's picking up, and anything I can do to help, dude. So yeah, appreciate you jumping on today, and hopefully everybody got something out of this, enjoyed the conversation. Until next time, love you guys. Peace.